Hi guys, today I'm finally going to show you how to make my trademark sourdough bread. This is the third time I'm actually filming this video. The other two times I wasn't happy with the quality of the video, so I decided to refilm it. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm a bit of a perfectionist and I really wanted to make this video exactly the way I want it to be, because bread is the staff of life, it's everything to me. So I hope that you enjoy this recipe and I hope you try it out, because having a homemade bread is like nothing else. It just makes you feel so self-sufficient and truly like a domestic goddess. And before we jump into the recipe, I'm just going to show you 5 different things that you need to make bread. And first of all, you need a mixing bowl like this. I have this plastic one. I'm not a big fan of plastic, but it's actually convenient in this case because it's so light and it's so easy to wash. And the important thing is to have a rounded bottom, so a simple salad bowl won't do. It needs to be a mixing bowl, and it needs to be quite big because your bread will double in size while it's fermenting. The next thing you need is something called the Dutch whisk, or also called the dough whisk, and it's perfect for mixing bread or cookies or any kind of thicker dough. It preserves your fingers and your hands, it doesn't dry them out because sourdough is quite acidic and it can be drying, so I love it for that reason. But if you don't have it, you can simply use your hands, it will be just as good. Next thing we're going to need is 2 bannetons because we're going to be making 2 loaves of bread. If you are on a budget and you're just starting out, you can definitely just get a round strainer and line it with some kitchen towel, and that will be your DIY banneton. But as you start getting better and better and you feel that you're going to be making bread for a long time, it's definitely worth investing into 2 of these, because honestly they cost just around £18, but they will last for a lifetime, so it's a great investment. And it will take your bread making to another level. It will just look so much more beautiful and so much more professional. So I definitely recommend getting a couple of bannetons. And then another thing we need is actually really heavy, so I'm gonna try and lift it up. Oh, okay, that's a Dutch oven, and it's basically a big round or oval cast iron pot that we need as a kind of pot for baking bread. So we put the bread inside and bake it in this way, and it preserves all the steam from the bread, so you get this perfectly moist inside. Brilliant for making bread. I highly recommend investing in it. It costs around 45 euros here in Europe in this size, and it needs to be somewhere between 3.5 to 5 liters or quart, otherwise it's going to be too big. I definitely recommend it, not just for bread, but in general for making stews, for making soups. It's very, very versatile and beautiful to look at. And the last thing you're going to need is, of course, a sourdough starter. So if you don't have one already, you can just make it at home. It takes 5 to 7 days. This particular one is the one I made myself in around 5 days, and it's honestly just as good. And then this one I bought from eBay, and it's 15 years old. It's slightly more pungent, a little bit more sour. But I like them both, so definitely don't hesitate to make your own instead of buying. I actually wrote a blog post with all the instructions, detailed instructions on how you can make your own sourdough starter at home, so I'll put a link somewhere here so you can go and check it out. And also, talking about the starters, it's important to use the starter before it gets too sour. So you need to feed it, if you keep it in the fridge or on the counter, whatever you keep it. Once you feed it, once it reaches the highest point, which is generally at least twice the size or slightly more than twice the size, that's when you need to use it. Don't wait until it starts going down, because then the bread will be quite sour. So generally it takes around maybe 8 hours to 10 hours or 12 hours, depending how hot it is where you live. And definitely catch that point when it's at the highest point and the bread is going to be nice and mild. Now it's time to get started with the actual recipe and bread making. All the exact quantities are in the description box or on my blog. So I'm going to start by adding organic white wheat flour to my mixing bowl. For this recipe I'm using around 70% white wheat flour and 30% whole grain spelt flour, just because white spelt is incredibly expensive here, but whole grain spelt is reasonable, so in this way I still get some of that spelt goodness. You can also replace with 100% of wheat or 100% spelt if you like, with the same amounts of flour. I always use organic flour because regular wheat is heavily sprayed with Roundup, and that's not something I want to consume. Next, I'm adding the whole grain spelt flour. I always keep my whole grain flours in the fridge to preserve the nutrients, because they lost very quickly after grinding if you don't store them properly. Next step is mixing both flours using my fingers. I also rake through the flour, getting rid of all those clumps of flour. There's nothing more annoying than finding flour clumps in your bread. Yuck! Next, I'm adding water. It's very warm here, so I'm using cold water. But if it's 21 degrees or less where you live, you can always use warm water at around 30 to 32 degrees Celsius to encourage fermentation and to make it a little bit faster. Mix this initial dough either using a dough whisk or your hands, and it doesn't have to be perfect, just make sure all the flour is incorporated. The next step is called autolyze, which simply means that I'm going to leave this dough alone for 30 minutes to allow the flour to absorb the water better. This will make the dough more supple and just easier to work with. Now it's time to add the sourdough starter. Just look at this beauty! It was fed around 8 hours ago and it's grown a lot in size in that time. And just look at these gluten strands inside. This is honestly one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my entire life. My husband actually calls this the liquid bread. Well, he's right, because it has the same fibers and elastic texture of bread. I'm adding the sourdough starter to the dough that we previously mixed up, and I'm also adding Himalayan salt, or you can also use sea salt, but make sure it's fine. My camera decided to stop recording. Basically, I've just started kneading, and I'm kneading using two different methods: the pincer method and folding. So pincer is basically like pinching the bread with your fingers all over, and folding is stretching the dough up to the resistance point and then folding it onto itself. Don't stretch until it breaks, because that breaks up the gluten strands that you're trying to build. Always knead with damp hands. Keep a bowl of water next to you, and as soon as it starts sticking too much, just wet your hands, shake the excess water off, and then keep pinching and folding. Alternate between the two until the dough is fully elastic. It will take anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes depending on how experienced and quick you are. For me personally, it takes no more than 5 minutes. With each set of kneading, the dough will be a bit more elastic. When that hard and elastic feeling in the middle disappears and the dough feels evenly elastic all over, that's when you can stop. Now I'll need to do 4 stretch and folds within about 90 minutes to 2 hours. I'm going to cover the dough and leave it alone for 20 minutes. Come back in 20 minutes and do another stretch and fold just like this. Do it 3 times and then let it rest for 30 minutes, and then do it one last time. So basically 4 folds. And each time the dough will feel completely different. So this clip that you saw was for the first stretch and fold. Now this is what it looks like during the second stretch and fold. This is the third stretch and fold. And now look at this one. This is the fourth one, the last one. The dough is so supple and just so incredibly elastic. So at this point we're done. So the next step is placing the bowl in a plastic bag or cover it with cling film just to make sure it doesn't dry out during the bulk fermentation. And now for the next step, we actually have 2 options depending on how warm it is in your house where you live. So the first option, if it's more than 23 degrees at your house, you'll want to retard the fermentation in the fridge to develop the flavor and ferment the dough more thoroughly. So retarding is basically making the fermentation longer and making it a bit slower. Leave the dough on the counter for another 60 to 90 minutes and then place it in the fridge. So it's ready to go to the fridge when it has visible bubbles on the sides and it has also grown around 20 to 30% compared to the original size. And then once you put it in the fridge, you'll have to leave it there for a few hours or overnight depending on the temperature in your house. But basically when it doubles, it's ready for the next step. For example, in my house at the moment there are 26 degrees and I leave it in the fridge for around 5 to 6 hours. The second option is for those who have 23 degrees or less at home. Just keep it on the counter for anywhere between 10 to 12 hours depending on the temperature. But basically just watch it. When it doubles, it's ready. And around 5 to 6 hours later, it's ready for shaping, which is our next step. So I'm sprinkling some flour on my work surface. And I'm getting the dough out of the fridge, and just look at how much this beauty has grown. It's amazing. It's a true miracle of nature. Now I'm sprinkling some flour around the edges of the dough as well to make the removal easier. And also flouring my hands and then gently easing it out. Be gentle not to break the gluten strands that you worked so hard to develop. I'm flouring my hands and stretching out the dough just a little bit to form a sort of a rectangle, just to make it easier to divide it into 2 equal pieces, because we're going to bake 2 loaves. I'm sprinkling the flour along the line where I'm going to divide the dough, and then cut using a dough cutter, or just simply use a knife if you don't have one. Shaping the bread is really easy. All you have to do is just stretch and fold on all 4 sides. It's going to look like a neat, tight parcel. Next step is pulling it towards you on the counter like this. Just wrap your palms around it and pull towards you while pushing with fingers at the bottom to create tension on the surface. Do it on all sides. Done! I'm taking my banneton, sprinkling flour generously and rubbing it in on all the sides and bottom. This will prevent sticking, and you must not wash the banneton between uses because you just shouldn't. Place the bread in the banneton and then repeat with the second loaf. I'm placing both bannetons in a plastic bag to prevent drying, and I'm also rubbing some oil onto the bag to make sure that the bread doesn't stick. Leave the bread to ferment on the counter for around 4 hours if the dough wasn't refrigerated. In my case, with the dough refrigerated and room temperature of 26 degrees Celsius, I proof it for around 3 to 4 hours. And as the temperatures will keep changing, you'll have to keep adjusting, but just watch what the bread is doing. When it doubles, it's ready. Next step is preheating the oven to 250 degrees Celsius for 30 to 40 minutes with a Dutch oven inside. Once the oven is ready, get some parchment paper, sprinkle some flour on it, take the Dutch oven from the oven, remove the lid, and prepare to reveal the beautiful shape of your loaf. Carefully release the bread from the banneton onto the paper like this, and then place the paper with the bread inside the Dutch oven. You can also avoid using the paper, but using it makes it so much easier and just so much more neat. Close the lid and place in the oven, reduce temperature to 245 degrees Celsius and bake for 35 minutes. Once the time is up, remove the lid and bake for 10 more minutes. Oh wow! Came out right. Voila! Your artisan sourdough bread is made. And you are a true domestic goddess. Or god. Just look at this beauty! And next you'll need to repeat the same baking process with the second loaf. And here's the second loaf I baked that day. Always wait for at least 30 minutes before you slice into your freshly baked sourdough bread. While it's hot, it's actually still cooking itself in the inside. Don't interfere. Ready to see what it looks like inside? Just look at this beautiful crust. Inside is actually incredibly moist and chewy in the most pleasant way. And the outside is crunchy. It's simply divine. Just look at all the irregular holes. That's how you can distinguish sourdough bread from regular bread, because of these amazing holes. And I'll leave you with some mouth-watering shots. Enjoy! And if this doesn't motivate you to start making your own bread, I don't know what will. And I'm going to show you my favorite snack in the entire world. So simple yet so good. Yep, bread and butter.